Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Correct Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2010 action-adventure movie titled Robin Hood. Now, Robin Hood runs for 2 hours and 20 minutes long. It is directed by Ridley Scott. The script was written by Brian Helgeland. The story was written by Brian Helgeland, Ethan Rife, and Silas Voris. It is produced by Ridley Scott, Brian Grazer, and Russell Crowe. It is composed by John Matheson. The cinematography by Pietro Scalia. It was edited by Mark Steitenfeld. And the stars of the movie are Russell Crowe, Cate Blanchett, Max von Sydow, William Hurt, Mark Strong, Oscar Isaac, Danny Huston, Eileen Atkins, Mark Addy, Matthew MacFayden, Kevin Durand, Scott Grimes, Alan Doyle, Douglas Hodge, and Leah Seydoux. Now, if you are expecting this Robin Hood to be follows the old tradition of the story of Robin Hood, this handsome, debonair guy who just came back from fighting the Crusades with King Richard, only to realize that when he returned home, his whole country, his town where he's from, Nottingham, is all corrupted with government leaders who are practically getting richer at the cost of peasants who have sunk to the low levels of being destitute and famine. And so it's up to Robin Hood and his band of merry men, rob the rich, give to the poor, while galloping his way through the beautiful, rich, green countryside of merry old England. And they're drinking and partying. And Robin Hood is this handsome, dashing, smiling guy who is pretty much a fugitive of the law. Government officials want his head on a silver platter, and yet he still manages to remain optimistic, laid back, and, this cookie cutter fan favorite good guy character, who of course is obviously doing bad stuff for the sake of a good cause. Well, guess what? Do you think you're going to find any of that stuff in this movie? Well, you could just throw everything out the window. Because there's nothing here about Robin Hood robbing the rich and giving to the poor. There is no Robin Hood dressing up in immaculate green. And the English countryside is not a lush, beautiful landscape. Okay, I will say that some of the cinematography is pretty good, but it's not, lush green countryside. And of course, when it comes to Robin Hood, the main colors that you see on the screen, you may think are green. Well, you're wrong there too. Because the scenery is kind of murky and brown and rainy. And if you think that this Robin Hood is a handsome, dashing young man with a perpetual smile on his face, well, you can forget that too. Because this is not a smiley-faced Robin Hood. No. This is Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe can't do smiley faces. Russell Crowe is angry. Russell Crowe can only exhibit two emotions: angry and intensity. And that's all you'll find from him. And if you think that he's, some smiley, laid-back kind of guy, well, forget it. That's not going to happen here. And also the whole thing about robbing the rich and give to the poor, well, you can forget that too. I mean, there were some parts that made you think of Robin Hood, especially when the Sheriff of Nottingham and Lord Godfrey kidnap Lady Marian and does something kind of deviant, and Robin Hood does step up to them, but that is probably about maybe an only scene. In fact, want to know something? The Sheriff of Nottingham in this movie, he only has 3 lines of dialogue. And he's actually hardly ever seen. In fact, he's not even the leading villain in this movie. He's practically pushed to the background. And also the whole thing's about the concept of Robin Hood is also very, very much misquoted. Almost as if the people, the script writers, may have never read a Robin Hood story, or maybe they did read a Robin Hood story and decide to do their own different interpretations. Were they trying to make Robin Hood more realistic instead of fantasy? If so, then I really don't know what to say. People who are like traditionalists will be, of course, very obviously disappointed while seeing this is not a Robin Hood movie. It feels more like if Gladiator and Braveheart had a baby together, then you would probably see that. I mean, want to know something? It didn't feel like a Robin Hood movie. You want to watch the old Hey Naughty Naughty Robin Hood? Go watch the Errol Flynn 1947 one. Hell, even the Mel Brooks Robin Hood Men in Tights, which is basically a parody of Robin Hood, actually felt more like a Robin Hood movie than a lot of the other movie Robin Hood adaptations that I've seen in the past. Even Prince of Thieves, which came out in 1991, which is still much better than this adaptation, but which is still not saying much, is actually has a little more emphasis to the Robin Hood story than this one. This one felt more closer to Braveheart than it did Robin Hood. Which is, well, to me, I'm all about, hey, you want to come up with new ideas? Fine, come up with new ideas. But the traditionalists who would have expected to see a Robin Hood movie is not going to see a Robin Hood movie here. It felt more like Braveheart set in medieval England than compared to an actual Robin Hood. There's no mention of Sherwood Forest, and Robin Hood is not necessarily robbing the rich to give to the poor. In fact, his biggest crime is probably illegal forgery, because the actual real Robin of Locksley, or should I say Robert of Locksley, died while fighting with Robin Longstride and King Richard the Lionheart during the Crusades. And so then Robin Longstride eventually steals this guy's identity, claims to be the son of Sir Walter Locksley, and the blind old man decides, you'll do. Almost as though as if you try to tell him that, hey, your son died in the Crusades, and he didn't even have the balls or the gonads to confess that I stole his name. But poor old blind and maybe borderline senile Walter says to him, you'll do. Wow. I would probably expect more of an emotion coming from the fact that your own son died in the Crusades. I would have expected maybe a much more better reaction. That's kind of a disappointment. I understand perfectly well that life itself is one big gamble. Movies themselves are a gamble depending on the success in regards to how much people will pay to see the movie of their choice. If it's a hit, it will make you. If it's a failure, it will break you. But movie fans come to the movies not just for escape, but particular films that have been adapted many times before will want to see if the adaptation was told in terms of accuracy, expectancy, and execution. This one failed to deliver on all three merits. The go for broke ideology has been trending in the movies for many years by taking a classic story and creating new hooks and interpretations that might be praised by critics by taking something old and making new twists around it, or it can anger some of the traditionalists who will likely pinpoint the inaccuracy of the story they've grown up with. Me, I am kind of sort of stuck between the middle. On the one hand, I'm always a stickler for new ideas, but on the other hand, I'm still a traditionalist at heart, and I was kind of partially disappointed that a lot of stuff did not fall. In fact, you know what? In this movie, you're expecting to see maybe King Richard come back in the end. He doesn't. Actually, in this movie, he died in the Crusades. And Prince John, who was supposed to be the interim king, eventually just becomes the permanent king. Which I'll get more into that in a bit. But there's a lot of historical inaccuracies in this movie that takes away a lot from the Robin Hood lore. And that is going to likely piss off a lot of people. Under the direction of Ridley Scott, this 2010 version of Robin Hood has to be one of the most insignificant adaptations of the classic tale, with a different take and look that thinks way outside the narratives where creative liberties take over from literature accuracy. I mean, creative liberties. I think they overdid it with the creative liberties by just throwing everything away and just coming up with a new interpretation. Like it's supposed to be an origin story. This predates the whole rob the rich, give to the poor. Well, why couldn't they call it Robin Hood the prequel? Or maybe you should call it Before Robin Hood. Or something like that. But no, they just simply called it Robin Hood. And we were expecting the whole, hey, naughty, naughty, rob the rich, give to the poor, drinking and doing campfires around the outside of Sherwood Forest, drinking and eating mutton chops and fighting the sheriff of Nottingham and all that. No, you don't find that here. Like I told you before, the sheriff of Nottingham really has no backstory in this at all. In fact, he's hardly even featured. So then you're also thinking, what's a Robin Hood story without the sheriff of Nottingham? I mean, wasn't he supposed to be like the only lone villain in the story? Well, aside from him and a few army men and Prince John, aren't they supposed to be the antagonists? No. And like I said, this movie feels more Braveheart than it does Robin Hood. Okay, yes, we do get him coming home from the Crusades. Yes, Richard the Lionheart is not following him there. And Prince John was supposed to be only sort of like an interim King of England. Hopefully expecting that King Richard would come back. Newsflash for you. They really changed this whole narrative by making King Richard the Lionheart die and stay dead. There you go, that takes everything else away. And while, yes, it is true that Prince John or King John was an inept and unconfident king who made bad decisions, they do that here. But instead of making his bad decisions make you want to hate him more, they kind of actually doctored him up so he's actually he's more of a sympathetic louse than a pathetic asshole. Like he practically doesn't know what he's doing. Like he probably never expected that he was going to end up becoming king and that he was going to live off of being, not necessarily being responsible and just living off his family's royalties because, he's a prince. He's blessed with loyalty. He's got zero to no worries in the world. And that he felt that, hey, being the younger brother to big brother Richard, I don't have to worry too much about responsibilities. Well, guess what? Ding dong. Hello. You are now a king. So that means you got to get up off your little royal ass and take any fucking initiative that comes your way. You didn't think this was going to happen to you. And of course, since Richard Lionheart wasn't married or had children, you're going to be the next in line, little bro. Little bro John. So once again, Ridley Scott collaborates with Russell Crowe to create a newer but not so brighter interpretation of Robin Hood by making it more historically accurate than as opposed to being, like the whole fictionalized s- stories that we all grew up with, which makes each setting maybe authentic, knowing the time period of the classic tale, while at the same time taking too many elements of fantasy fiction that made the tale so beloved. It's like everything you loved about the Errol Flynn classic Robin Hood was thrown out the window, giving Ridley Scott too much creative licensing to make this in no way feel like a Robin Hood story. We get the feeling that Scott was intending this story to be an origin story, predating to Robin's outlaw days, that sees him returning home to Nottingham, England, after fighting with King Richard the Lionheart, played by Danny Huston, in the Crusades, and the events that led him to becoming an outlaw, and the deceitful French subterfuge and convoluted leadership of his merry men. So, in other words, he comes home from the war, only to realize that the war has come home to him as well. Like I said, there's no Rob the Rich who come to the poor. Instead, what we have is a hostile takeover from the French, who are planning to invade England, and it's up to the British to take these guys out and ship them back to Gaul. What? That's right, you heard me. Gaul. Long before the country we all know as France was originally named Gaul. Gaul. Didn't know that? You learn something new every day. I might be weird, but I'm not stupid. The final product of this movie is faintly undefined. It's flabbergasting. It may have the sets and costumes that make you expect from a 12th century standpoint that the story is set in. I had no problems with the costumes. But the alternate historical context isn't fully enlightening, making it more mundane and laboring to watch. In replacement to the immaculate confines of the Sherwood Forest and the town of Nottingham with its green backdrop and more storybook-like atmosphere from the Errol Flynn interpretation, we get a more dark and grittier locale. And our antagonist isn't a lovable anti-hero committing sin for the charitable contribution of donating to those unfortunately deprived soul. No, Russell Crowe portrays Robin Hood as a self-contained, intense warrior who seems perpetually scowl-faced, who's destined to have King John, played by Oscar Isaac, sign the Magna Carta and join them in the fight against France. Even the citizens, all dressed in tattered clothes and wallow in their filth as the skies are darkened with continual downpours on the cobbled streets below. Granted, I'm okay with retelling a fictional tale with some historical references added to the narrative, but does it have to be executed with extreme melancholy? It just ruins the fun and spontaneous settings that symbolize the lore and the fantasy of the classic story completely. I mean, sure, the 2018 one with Taron Egerton wasn't really that much to write home about, and even Kevin Costner's Robin Hood Prince of Thieves made me cringe quite a bit. Especially the fact that Kevin Costner himself, who's supposed to be playing a noble British hero, should speak with a British accent. I mean, fine, you want to hire an American to to portray a British hero, at least have him attempt to do a British accent. It doesn't matter what part of Britain does he need to be a British to have a British accent? Yes, I know British people in different places tend to have different twangs and different ways of pronouncing words and stuff like that. But then again, it's like that in all the provinces of Canada where everybody seems to have different accents, believe it or not. And Americans also in different parts of the country have different accents too. But you know what? Since Kevin Costner's American, just use the Queen's accent and speak the Queen's English. What's so harmful about that? That's not copyright infringement or cultural appropriation. That's cultural appreciation, and it makes everything seem more realistic, like we're actually watching the movie set place in Nottingham, England, and not Nottingham, California. That's right. Put on a British accent. You're playing a British hero. Tally ho. You know. I was pissed off about that. At least make the effort. Hell, like I said, even though the Mel Brooks Men in Tights was built off of parody with pop cultural inaccuracies that was meant to be, at least it still felt like a Robin Hood. And Carrie Elway's kind of like comes the closest to ever what the way the Errol Flynn movies were. Hell, even the 1973 Disney animated anthropomorphic animals playing Robin Hood characters also seem to have a lot more of a feeling of a Robin Hood movie. This one, no. Also, and although I will say one thing, when it came to accents, okay, Cate Blanchett, who actually is an Australian actress, actually did utilize the British accent quite well. But then again, that's easy to say because in the late 90s and into the 2000s, she had played Queen Elizabeth I in a couple of movies where she actually, I believe, was nominated or maybe won the Best Actress in a Leading Role performance. And she put on a British accent quite convincingly. Because let's face it, if you want to know something, an Australian accent and a British accent do not sound the same. Russell Crowe, he seems to weaves in and out between trying to do British accent and New Zealand accent, and it just comes out weird and awkward. And he's not the only one too. Sometimes Oscar Isaac just can't seem to decide what accent he comes into, and sometimes he often slips into his Spanish accent every once in a while, when King John does not have Spanish ancestry in him. And although, I'm not going to knock out Oscar Isaac's performance for wise, but at times I often wonder if he was actually playing authentically King John or almost to the border of almost to self-parody as well. And, usually when it comes to Robin Hood coming across to be played as a feel-good movie, there was nothing I felt really good about this movie. In fact, I was pretty frustrated. A lot of the fun and excitement that you get from the classic tales doesn't have anything exciting or memorable to make me feel invested. Because it's just so drab and depressing. The thing that turns me off of this adaptation is that screenwriter Brian Helgeland makes Robin's origin story so poorly structured. So Robin Longstride returns home from the Crusades and is unexpectedly attacked by the French military. A dying knight by the name of Robert Locksley, played by Douglas Hodge, permits Robin to take his identity and return the sword home to his dying father's estate in Nottingham, and to ensure his elderly blind father Walter, played by Max von Sydow, that the Locksley's land is secured from being stolen. Even though he's going around forging his name, claiming he's Robin of Locksley when really he isn't. And of course, this whole thing about him being married to Maid Marian, even though they're not really actually officially married because Robin has stolen the actual Locksley person's name. So they're not really actually in love with each other. But she also learns quickly that this guy is not my husband. But then eventually adjusts to this new person and takes him in as her husband. I know it's convoluted, and it really shouldn't. But of course, Ridley Scott does not. But of course, Ridley Scott does not want subtlety or plot lines that are easy to follow. No, 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 no. He wants things to be complicated. And so begins Robin fighting against the system. He eventually becomes an outlaw, even though he has made King John sign the Magna Carta so that they could go off and fight the French, defeat them, become a hero. And then from out of nowhere, King John decides, let's make him an outlaw. And yet, he really didn't do anything kind of outlawish, except maybe forge his name and claiming to be somebody who he isn't. Maybe that is probably kind of like potential for being an outlaw. I don't know. But so after all this time, I don't know what to think. By the time the centerpiece of this narrative comes around, we are clocking into the hour-and-a-half mark. And while this is commencing, we are unceremoniously serenaded with cultural singing and dancing, and political overlords intoxicating the civilians with their authoritarian intentions. All the while, Robin walks around with anger in his blood. The thing about this movie is that although the settings and the props are in place, the dedication doesn't feel leisurely, but more obligatory in its intentions. It feels as though Ridley Scott and Russell Crowe would rather be doing something else besides this project. And it shows that there's really not much heart put into it. Just trashing everything about the old traditionalist and trying to make something more dark, gritty, and maybe more realistic. But there's just no heart put into it. And sure, there are climactic battles and lots of intensity delivered, but nothing really screams out a lot because the head seems to be working and the heart seems to be sitting out. You need to have a balance of head and heart, but you don't find the heart into it. Which is sad because on the technical level, the set design, the costumes, and the view from King John's castle is actually quite impressive. I just wish the performances was taken care of the script. Performance-wise, every character does what material is given to them, even though some play better than others. And even though his unrealistic approach, Russell Crowe can still turn in a great performance, even if his emotions are just anger and intentions. Cate Blanchett might take her approach to a more nuanced manner, but she could still inject a little fun into her role, adding more dimension than the other Maid Marians before her. Hell, she also seems to be not just some maid working in the castle. She actually seems to come across as being more or less a merchant farmer who seems to be quite adept with business dealing and even has some great leaderships in her. Oh, and also because they also want the strong, independent women tropes injected into her, she also seems to be quite a skilled fighter. And hell, even when they were battling the French, led by Mark Strong's character, who was an English trader named Lord Godfrey, and the French were all coming in, and Robin Hood and his band of fellow vigilantes, which also may include the Merry Men and a few other soldiers who are allies to Robin Hood. Hell, even Marianne herself decides to throw herself and fight in the war too, which you have never seen before in a Robin Hood movie. But I guess since they wanted her to be the strong, independent woman who does not want to sit in on the fights and wants to get involved, hell, she's even putting on the suit and armor and battling the French herself, almost sort of similar to like a Joan of Arc type, which is something that they, which is something that seems to be somewhat commonplace in a lot of fight scenes. I mean, it's not like to the point of extreme cringe, but I guess it was just their ways of just adding, more dimension to her. And she also still, abandons the forest and also starts to be friends with, guess what? You know who makes an appearance in this movie? The Lost Boys. I kid you not. The Lost Boys are in a Robin Hood movie. I was almost like saying to myself, Lost Boys? You do realize this is a Robin Hood story and not a Peter Pan story. And just because Robin Hood and Peter Pan wear similar green apparel doesn't mean they're one of the same people. Whereas Robin Hood could have a little more realism to its folklore, Peter Pan is just a complete work of fiction, and you guys just simply don't belong here. Because Robin Hood and Peter Pan are two different people. But yes, the Lost Boys are in this Robin Hood adaptation. And they also seem to act almost like semi-primate instead of actual authentic boys. They're just basically, I mean, no, they do have cognitive thinking approaches, but they also sometimes still have a little bit of primitive savagery in them, which is not right because when it comes to performances, I will have to say the best performance definitely would have to go to Mark Strong, who once again shows some great skills as the villain of Lord Godfrey. I mean, he's a guy who, aside from being a villain, he's not like an invincible villain. I mean, he does battle Robin and he does take scars. And sometimes some of these scars just stay on him. I mean, sure, the guy's still tough as rocks, but but it's not like he's the type of guy who will scar and then next scene he looks like he was unscathed. No, once the scars appear on him, it stays on him. So, and believe it or not, Mark Strong, he's just so awesome when he plays villain characters. So, I gotta give hats off to him. The other standout performance would probably also be Max von Sydow. He's still a legend in the film industry and makes all of his scenes and characteristics authentic and noble. The rest of the other characters, well, like I said, the Lost Boys was not needed there. The Merry Men, like Little John, Alan O'Day, and Will Scarlet, they're just pretty much put there because in Robin Hood stories they have to exist. Same could be said for Friar Tuck. He wasn't given much to do. Sheriff of Nottingham, which is a surprise, was really given little, and he could have just been excluded from this movie, and nobody would really know the fucking difference. Like he wasn't really needed. King John was supposed to be kind of almost like a secondary villain in the story, but instead he's basically played for parody. It's sad that a film of this caliber is not from the heart, and the delivery lacked the passion that the classic fictional story invokes. I'm okay with the concept of taking an old story and adding new ideas to the narrative. I just wished a lot of passion was put into it. It would have made a big difference. But instead, what we got was a lot of sentimental mush. And everything about the Robin Hood story, well, it was all thrown out the window. Errol Flynn would be rolling in his grave right now. You want a good, authentic Robin Hood story? You won't find it in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. You won't find it here. I don't think you would find it in the 2018 one. Hell, the closest would be the Mel Brooks one, even though that was played for parody. But at least it felt like you would expect in a Robin Hood movie. I mean, Carrie Always and the rest of the other characters who are playing his merry men, they all gave me the impression that I was watching a Robin Hood movie. I didn't feel like I was watching a Robin Hood movie here. And I was disappointed. I'm not going to say that the bad outweighs the good, but there is a lot of bad. But there's still part of me that liked a lot of the stuff, including mostly the technical stuff, the costumes, the props, the scenery. And maybe Ridley Scott's intentions were to create a more realistic look and to take us outside of the whole folklorist thing. And maybe to some it might impress others, by taking an old idea and adding new twists to it. But it felt more like something taken from a fan fiction novel that you would find online and decide, hey, let's go for it. And our old school traditionalists will be more disappointed. Me, I like to sort of call it down the middle, which is why that if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give Robin Hood 2010 a 6. Because underneath all this rant that I was doing, I still would kind of recommend you to see this movie. But you will be disappointed when a lot of the traditions of the Robin Hood story was taken out for more liberal causes. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric, your writer, saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.